So when you head to the polls this November, you will notice 3 constitutional amendments on the ballot, actually on the back of the ballot. The first would create a redistricting commission. The second would allow bills to be sent electronically to lawmakers instead of using all those dead tree papers. We have talked at length about those 2. The third is also nothing to be ignored. The School Bond Act would allow the state to borrow $2 billion to upgrade technology and infrastructure in schools statewide. Joining us from our Capitol Bureau to talk more about this is Debra Arles. She is a board member of the 4201 Schools Association, 4201 that is. Debra, it's good to see you.
Thank you. Nice to be back with you, Liz.
It's good to have you. So, and you're coming to us from our Capitol Bureau, which has been renovated and looks fantastic. So I'm glad that you could make it.
Yes.
I want to talk to you a little bit about this. You're in favor of it. Now, we have heard people, a number of people, including Merrill Tisch, the Chancellor of the Board of Regents, who have expressed some concern about borrowing for technology when that technology would be obsolete very quickly. So explain to me why you believe this is a good idea.
Well, for the 4201 schools, which I am one of the executive directors of 11 schools across New York State, we serve students who are deaf, blind, and or physically disabled.
Yes.
If the Bond Act were to go through, there's language in the law that would allow monies to flow to the 4201 schools that would also be able to be used for technology. So we're in favor of it in order to help us upgrade our technologies for our students.
So I imagine that the sort of technologies that your students would use is different by definition than the sorts that your average quote-unquote student would use, an able-bodied kid. I mean, don't you have, however, the same problem? In other words, if you buy a laptop that's enabled with voice recognition software, for example, doesn't that go out of date fairly quickly?
It does over time, but much of the technology that our students use is also the same technology that other more typical students use. In addition to that technology, we have some special technologies that our students use, whether it's because they're deaf or they're blind or they're physically disabled.
So would it be more expensive then for your students to acquire this sort of technology?
There'd be more technology to acquire, so the expense, yes, would be greater because of that. Because not only do we need the bandwidth, do we need the basics that any school would need, which is the equipment, the laptops, the computers. We need technologies for low vision students or technologies that give physically disabled students ability to access things that they couldn't otherwise,
Right.
deaf students to access information they couldn't otherwise.
What is the status of technology at the schools currently? Or does it vary widely the way it would vary widely in public schools depending on how wealthy the district is that the school is located in?
It varies widely depending on what's been done over the years, bandwidth being one of the first things we're all looking at and needing to look at to increase our bandwidth so that we can access more of the technologies. So depending on what people's budgets have allowed them to do in any given year, they are trying to upgrade as they go along each year.
So initially, were you not included in the Bond Act proposal? Again, this is something that the governor put forth in his State of the State address, and then subsequently it's now on the ballot. It's been passed twice by the legislature as required for a constitutional amendment, and now it goes to the voters. You had to lobby to be included.
Correct, we did. The monies were originally there. The language in the Bond Act is so that the money goes to public school districts.
Right.
Being private schools that are state funded, we had to lobby to work a way in for language to be put in to the law that would allow us to get some monies as well.
And you were successful in that, but it's interesting because these schools serve a population of kids that is very needy and deserving, obviously, I think most people would say, and yet you keep getting left out. And I find that strange. I mean, what is it exactly that the state is not paying attention to these schools? Why?
I'm not sure that's what it is. I think that the monies, the funds have always flowed separately for the 4201 schools, and they, trying to look at what public schools get versus what the 4201 schools get has been the tension, the rub. So our job is to advocate for our students, and you're right, some of the most vulnerable students in the districts, and that's why they're placed at our schools that are very specialized with specialized training, because they're not able to be served in district. So we are always working to advocate for their needs as well, despite the differences in the funding and the flow, but trying to recognize or reconcile with those differences.
What is the percentage of this money that you will be able to access if, in fact, the constitutional amendment passes?
There's language in the law that says there would be up to $5 million that would be used in schools like ours, the 4201 schools.
Is that enough?
Probably not, but it's a good start. We're willing to start with whatever we can get.
Because when you talk to people like Meryl Tisch, for example, I mean, her concern was that there's no plan. You're asking for quite a bit of money, and that the state is already coming up against a borrowing cap, if you will. I mean, it's bumping up against its limit, and there's concern. There's good borrowing and bad borrowing, obviously, and this isn't going into debt for something frivolous, but nevertheless, the idea of exactly how the money is going to be spent remains to be seen, though there have been hearings that are held on this subject. Do the 4201 schools have a specific plan?
We did. We surveyed ourselves when this came up months ago, and we sort of did an analysis school by school of what it is, where we'd start, and what we would each need. And it exceeded probably the amount we stand to get, but at least we have that assessment and a place to start, like I said.
So what are you doing, I mean, other than having this conversation with me, what are you doing to encourage people to vote yes? Because again, these constitutional amendments, though we've been talking about them, are a little bit on the obscure side, and this one has arguably received the least amount of attention, though education is a topic that people care a lot about.
We try to reach out to all of our parents and their family members and people who will be voting to let them know that that has a direct impact on us.
And so it's a grassroots effort internally among the community of the 4201 schools.
Correct.
Yeah. Going forward, aside from this Bond Act, are you already in planning for the next budget? Because again, getting a funding stream that's steady is something that has been difficult for this population of schools. What are you looking forward to doing in 2015?
Well, we have been flat funded for the last 5 years, so we sort of know what to expect in terms of the actual funding that we stand to get. But with costs rising in every fiscal year, that's what we work around, trying to figure out, knowing that we're getting a flat amount, not getting anything more, with costs that are going up, how do we manage those kind of deficiencies in our budget.
So if the Bond Act does not pass, what is that going to mean for you?
That will mean there won't be access to the set aside for the schools like the 4201 schools if that's not passed.
Right, but what does it mean for the kids?
Well, it means that we can't do the upgrades now like we would like to. We have to just keep looking for ways to fund it through our own budgets, through federal funds, and through private funding if possible.
And how likely of a scenario is that?
It's not, for us, not a very big scenario. We don't have a lot of revenue that comes from private fundraising.
Well, we are following this, obviously, and this is a population that would be particularly well served by the Bond Act. And Deborah, I thank you for coming in to discuss it with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it and giving us some airtime about it. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.